Well, hello there. Fancy meeting you. Good afternoon, Peter. Thank you so much for having me back after the debacle last time with the microphone.
Not at all.
But we're here and the mic is on, which is great.
Good.
So, first of all, could you just introduce yourself and your role here in the department?
My name is Peter Rowley-Conwy. I'm a professor here in the department. I've been here for 23 years, I think, and I'm a professor of environmental archaeology. So, animal bones principally, ways of life, hunter-gatherers, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And of course I teach lots of students and all that kind of thing. Right,
okay, so very much, it's all kind of a party really.
Yeah.
Got primitive life and also the Mesolithic.
You could say so.
Now, so on your, I gather, mostly self-written bio on the university website,
right,
you're described as being the pig man, or the pig guy. Why is this?
I got into animal bones when I was an undergraduate via Tony Legg, who was an inspiring teacher when I was an undergrad in Cambridge. And I went to Denmark to do my PhD, and the place was stiff with Mesolithic and Neolithic pig bones, and I got obsessed with looking at things like seasonality, were they wild or domestic, and all the rest of it. And there's such a good source of information, pigs, that I've done lots of other animals too. I'm red deer. As a Welshman, I have a penchant for sheep, of course, but as you know, basically pigs are my first and abiding love, you could say.
I see. Okay. So, if is it therefore the way in which pigs have changed from being wild into domestic, or is it something more nuanced?
Among other things, I mean, from a methodological point of view, they're a very rich source of information. So they tell you not just about whether they're wild or domestic and the domestication process, but that is a very important part of it. They tell you about how hunter-gatherers were using the landscape, because you can tell what time of the year juvenile pigs were killed in, all that kind of stuff. So they're very good from a whole series of points of view.
I see. Okay. Now I gather you just got back from the Outer Hebrides.
Yes.
What happened on your time away? Did you find anything interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. Mike Church and Rosie Bishop are running the excavation. I plug them. And what we're after is the earliest occupation of the Outer Hebrides. Mike found the first site about 10 or a dozen years ago. Radiocarbon dated it, so we went back 4 years ago to dig that. And what we've done very cunningly every year is, towards the end of the excavation, is find another site that we've got to go back and dig the year after.
I see.
True to form, we've done that. So they're little shell middens, usually shell middens, with fish bones and things like that. So we're looking at kind of coastal canoe type hunter-gatherers, fishers mainly, actually.
Okay, I see. And how does this relate to broader period studies across Northern Europe? Are these communities in any way like communities, say, in Denmark, for example?
In some ways, yes, insofar as they're coastal, but in other ways, very likely not. They're on a rocky coast with little rocks and islets and skerries strung out over a big part of the Northwest Atlantic. They're subject to kind of stormy weather that Denmark is not. Also, on the Outer Hebrides at that time, before the Neolithic, so far we've got no evidence for any red deer or any large mammal of any kind. The hare is the largest terrestrial mammal we've got.
Right.
So, whereas of course in Denmark you've got aurochs and downwards, basically, the whole gamut.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And yeah, the auroch, you don't get much bigger than that.
You don't get much bigger than that.
Okay, fair enough. Well, you certainly answered the question about the pigs and what you've been up to at the moment, or most recently. But I suppose more broadly speaking, in terms of your experience as an archaeologist, what for you has been most satisfying about being an archaeologist?
What a difficult question to answer. You're always working out new ways to use material to find out about the past, and that's the kind of nitty-gritty challenge of it, is doing that sort of stuff. Challenge through my 40 plus years as an archaeologist is the way things have changed over the years. I mean, we've now got DNA and isotope labs and stuff like that in this department, which you'd never have conceived when I was an undergraduate would be telling us the kind of information that we can get out of them now.
Indeed. What was the common room in my day is now a DNA lab.
Of course. So, yeah. There you go.
Great. Really, really good.
And your day is not many years ago either. So,
No. Okay. So you find it satisfying just bringing together all these different elements? Then?
Yes. And just basically reading up more things, doing more bits of work, making more links between bigger and wider bodies of knowledge as basically you get older and read up more stuff and people tell you things.
I see. Okay. Well, that sounds like quite a sounds like archaeology isn't really meeting a thin end. Then it's actually getting broader.
Oh yes.
So in that case, do you think that archaeology has only more to add to it in engaging with other forms of research, other ways of quantifying data?
In a word, yes. I mean, archaeology is a real growth subject in a whole bunch of ways. I mean, more money is being spent on it than ever before. There are more professionals around the world than ever before. I mean, a dozen years ago, we had the International Congress for Archaeozoology 4-year conference here in Durham, and I was amazed that over 500 animal bone specialists from around the world all came to Durham. I didn't know there were that many. It never crossed my mind that there would be that many. But from all, that's just a little tiny sub-segment of archaeology, and there are those sorts of numbers. But that is matched by something else which is getting bigger at an even faster rate, and that's the amount of information that we have and have to deal with. That is a colossally growing area at the moment.
So I suppose that sort of leads into my next question, and that is, what do you think are the challenges for archaeology in coming years? I mean, it sounds like is this part of the challenge, actually managing this massive information?
I think it is, yes, in a series of ways. Thank God there are many more of us in museums and archaeology departments and units and all kinds of things around the world. But it is becoming the case that there is more and more and more information. For every archaeologist you appoint, it seems that there is yet more proportionally information being recovered out there. I think there's all sorts of ways you can answer the question, what is the main challenge of archaeology? I could go on about funding and destruction of the archaeological record, but I think it's dealing with the information. And there are so many more kinds of archaeology being done out there, not just the high-tech stuff like isotopes and things like that, but what have I been reading recently? The history of museums, for example. Who'd have thought 20 years ago that would be a subject for archaeological inquiry? But and add to that all the kind of conventional stuff that we dig up out of the ground, the historical record that goes with the later stuff, and you're dealing with an absolutely exponential increase in the amount of information. I mean, it's more than individuals can deal with, really, on an individual basis. So to some extent, that's paralleled by focusing finer and finer. To some extent, you can master that by being as old as me and basically trying to fill the dustbin brain with as much information of as many different kinds as you can.
I see. Wait, you say dustbin brain. What I find quite interesting about, I suppose, what you just said there is that element of, yes, there's possibly the need for more communication within archaeology and possibly between archaeologists and other disciplines. Yeah. For example, neuroscience has an awful lot to add to the understanding of human evolution.
Yes.
But do you think that there's another way to go, and in so much as talking about archaeology to the public? Is there a need for a broader understanding before people even become archaeologists?
Absolutely, yes. That is a much easier question to answer. Yes, because I mean, let's. The bottom line is that the public pay us, right? And if we don't communicate our results to them, they're not getting their money's worth, and they may decide bluntly to stop paying us or to reduce the funding. So unless we make it evident that we're doing exciting, interesting things, then we are at the mercy of the public, the elected government, all the rest of it. More than that, I think archaeology ought to be an essential part of anybody's school education. We take history for granted as a school curriculum subject, but I mean, history is what covers 1 or 2% of the human lifespan on Earth, and how many schools actually cover anything pre-Roman in this country? Very few.
Very few.
There are a few honourable exceptions that do, but it's not a large number.
No, okay. So
and let's sorry, can I put the boot into history?
Yeah.
Basically, archaeology is much more fun than history because of this great big exponential boom in the amount of data, the stuff we found out. I mean, basically, when I was in school, Henry VIII basically sorted out the Reformation. And that hasn't changed. You know, history, for all its interest, is more or less a worked out subject when it comes to new major discoveries. But in archaeology, they're happening all the time. So we're still a young discipline. We've got this huge time span to play with, huge burgeoning number of methods and number of people using those methods to get at all kinds of stuff. So if you want an interesting discipline that deals with the past, I'm afraid history isn't it anymore. It's archaeology. That's going to get me into trouble.
Trouble's always good. Well, I suppose in that sense, would you say that actually that history is a slightly luxurious profession in so much as you have the opportunity to reassess evidence based on many other people's opinions, whereas archaeology, you're sort of, I suppose you're at a cusp in terms of data gathering and analysis and interpretation.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, yes, I mean that's partly correct. What I also enjoy doing is subjecting history to the scrutiny of archaeology, because quite often the archaeological record will demonstrate that historical sources are giving at best a partial truth about things. So I rather like kind of taking the war to the enemy. That's a bad way to talk about history, but you know what I mean.
Well, we only grow, I suppose, in response to pressure.
Yes,
that's a positive way of putting it. So you're helping history.
I like to think so. I like to think so.
Exactly. Fair enough. Now, there's something that I did actually put you on the spot about last time we spoke, and that was your opinion with regards to developments in genetics and archaeology, and more specifically, cloning mammoth. What's your opinion on that?
I think it will be possible before too long. The way these things are, the technology is increasing in speed, means that I think it's probably within sight. I suspect it's going to be within my lifetime, maybe even before I retire, certainly within your lifetime. And then you have the ethical problem, which I'm glad to say is not one that I will have to face and make any decisions about.
No.
Because would one then bring an animal that's been extinct for 12,000 years back to life, which I dare say may be possible in due course. But where do you start? The okapi has been extinct for 100 years.
Yeah.
The mammoth for 12,000. Would one bring back? See, I always tell students, don't worry about Jurassic Park. It's a complete waste of time. Pleistocene Park, with mammoth, cave lion, huge hyenas, bison 2.5 yards high at the shoulder, aurochs to come back to them, giant deer with antlers 4 yards wide. That's what you want. You know, somewhere 100,000 acres up in the Pennines somewhere. And then the further ethical question, what about Neanderthals?
Yes.
They'll be within reach. They'll be within reach.
Or Homo floresiensis.
Whatever. Yes, indeed. That's a question I'm not going to answer, because I don't have a good answer that gets around the ethics of that.
Which is fair
It'd be
enough.
bloody interesting.
Absolutely. Well, I suppose what I would find very interesting would be the relationship between the environment and, say, for example, mammoth.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked in the past about that so-called patchwork of environment. They didn't exist on a belt of land or climate. Rather, it was a patchwork of different vegetation types.
Yes. Which they may have been partly responsible for creating in the first place and maintaining.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see if that came out as a response to the mammoth.
It certainly would.
But yeah, ethics.
Yes.
Yeah, that's something else for archaeology to encompass. Ethics,
definitely.
Okay. Well, I suppose finally, or approaching finally, what advice would you give to aspiring archaeologists, young or old, anyone who wants to get into archaeology?
Get out there and have fun. It's fascinating. That's all I can say. Get your feet wet.
Excellent. Okay, there you go. Superb. Well, speaking of fascinating, something else again we touched on last time we spoke. I remember a quote that you once wrote about, or something that you once wrote about, it being absurd for a tropical ape, human being, to travel north in the world.
Yes.
And how archaeology sort of shows how we develop this cultural buffer, and how does that sort of tie in with this sort of broad appeal and potential for actually tying in with the public and actually creating a broader understanding of archaeology. Actually, it is our grand story that sometimes we've gone further than we had any right to do.
We've gone further than any other species has done. I remember talking to João Zilhão, the Portuguese archaeologist, and we came up with a list of 4 incredible things that the human species has done. Occupy the Arctic, occupy the islands of the Pacific using tiny boats, occupy the central desert of Australia, a completely waterless arid zone, and go to the moon.
Okay. Yeah.
And 3 of those 4 were done by people with a Stone Age technology. Now that is a testimony to the adaptiveness and inventiveness of the human species. Really is. And showing how that's done. I mean, Eskimos, Inuit, would survive a matter of moments without clothing and shelter in the environments they've lived in for 5,000 years. And yet they've managed it perfectly well. And can harvest big whales from the depths of the ocean and all the rest of these things, which something a tropical savannah dwelling ape a few thousand years before would have been absolutely baffled by. So that's what our species can do.
So is that in some ways why you find yourself drawn to the prehistory side of things?
I think it is, yes, because an awful lot of what really excites me happened in prehistory or in peripheral areas to the main kind of historical areas of the globe. So the Australian desert and so forth, occupied for 50,000 years before Captain Cook ever sailed into Botany Bay, and he had no idea how remarkable were the people he was looking at. No,
absolutely. Okay, well, on that incredible bombshell, as they'd say in Tolkien, unfortunately, I'd just like to thank you so much for your time once again, and it's been just as interesting the second time round.
All right, not at all.
Bye.